Cool. All right. We're recording. We're not live, we're just recording. So thanks so much for joining everyone today. Welcome to what will be our first AMA between Max and amazing creator of open source project. We have Daniel here, Daniel Bugl, creator of Node Emoji. So super excited to get into a bit of a discussion today between Daniel and Max, really just about kind of backgrounds in the open source space, how we got into T, what our kind of future path is, and then really just kind of getting into the details as to where to go next for the T team, for Daniel himself, and how we can work towards a better open source future. So thanks everyone for joining. And with that, I'll give Daniel a bit of a ability to intro himself, and we'll kind of go around the room, and then we'll get kickstarted.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Ash. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm many things. Professionally, I work as a full stack developer and technical advisor for enterprises in the public sector, but I also do a lot of open source work. Unfortunately, now I have a bit less time for that, but I want to do it more again. And I also am a book author. I have written multiple books now in the React and JavaScript ecosystem, and that's also what my open source contributions and my work is mostly JavaScript and React. Yeah, that's about it for me, I think. Okay. Yep, thank you.
Nice. Sweet. Max, you want to go ahead and give a quick background for those that might not know you? Obviously, lots of people should, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's just so many recordings of me giving this spiel now that I feel that everyone's heard me say it a million times. But yeah, I got into programming somewhat accidentally via a career trying to be a scientist, which I discovered was not for me, but working with computers had always been something I was very interested in. So I went home and installed Linux on my home computer, getting rid of Windows, and discovered the open source community, which led to me doing a whole bunch of different apps, open source stuff. I just loved the way the open source community picked some problem to solve, and then did everything they could to try and solve it in a way that gave freedom to the users, the consumers, and I could see how that could change the world. This was 2004 or so, and open source was still considered kind of things that hippies did, really, at the time. Got myself a job in the industry via open source, and that led me to creating Homebrew, which is almost 15 years old. On the 20th of May, it will be 15 years old, which by itself is a remarkable thing. I was talking to the current lead maintainer of Homebrew about it the other day. When I created Homebrew, Debian was 15 years old at the time. And so, at the time that felt like ancient. And it's just strange to feel that Homebrew is now as old as Debian was at the time. So yeah, Homebrew, massive success, and it led to a career where I was alternating between contract work and open source work. And it was a couple of years ago now that I put my foot down about it. I was like, this just cannot go on. Open source is just too important to the world at this point, and I can't believe the only solutions people have managed to come up with are still very charitable in nature, where you're begging for donations, and the most you can usually end up expecting people to give you is a cup of coffee, which surprisingly few cups of coffee in my open source career, actually. So I looked for new methods that might work for trying to fix this fundamental problem with how the software industry works, and came across the idea of T protocol, which is what I founded. And then here we are 2.5 years later, right in the middle of testnet. Super exciting to be talking with influential open source people in the space, because that's who we're trying to help. That is the mission that we have here at T.
Amazing. Sweet. Thanks so much, Max. And I'm Ashton here. Joined somewhat recently, but kind of working on the partnerships and event side at T. We have Michael as well, leading on the DevRel side, helping everyone get up to speed and onboarded and good to go. So yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and get started here with a few questions for Daniel. I would love to know a bit more about kind of how you really got started with open source and what your early journey was like and what really got you into the space and interested in it so far.
Sure. Actually, interestingly, my story is a bit similar to Mac's story. I got into open source through Linux. Initially, I worked on Ubuntu. There was like an Ubuntu beginners team where you could help other people get used to like Linux ecosystem in general. And I started with contributions in like documentation and that part, but I was always more interested in the programming aspects. So then for a while, I didn't actually contribute much, but then after a while, I got into the JavaScript ecosystem, and I also started using that more for my own projects. And there I was always an early adopter of new technologies. And back then, one of those new technologies, now you almost can't believe that anymore, but it was Node.js. And I started using it, and there were a lot of things that it just didn't do yet. And one thing that I was surprised that it didn't do yet well was the having like a package that resolves emoji names. Like, on GitHub, you have this GitHub flavored markdown, which is all these kinds of emojis that you can put in. And I wanted to do something like that for a project that I had. And I was surprised that there was no easy library that could just convert this kind of like text format with the emoji tags to actual emoji. And then I created Node emoji for that. And that's that's now my biggest open source project. But I also have other open source contributions, especially in the React ecosystem. I was back then also an early adopter of React and then an early adopter of Redux. And I made a package there because they always said Redux is really good for like this time traveling debugging and for undo redo functionality. And again, I was surprised that there was no library that did that. And I was like, if it's so simple, then why is there not a library to do it yet? So I created my own based on some other things that I found in like the Elm language and so on. So I created my own package that does undo redo functionality for Redux. And that one also got somewhat popular. And most of my other open source projects are smaller projects. I didn't do open source for a long time then because my work took up most of my time. But now I'm trying to get back into it again. That's my story with open source. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very common, isn't it, that us open source type people just see there's a hole in functionality for something that we're passionate about, and we are the kinds of people who then just sit down, find a few hours, and start hacking it together, and then we want to put it out there and publish it. We never like expect anything in return for doing this, right? It's just that after you've put something out there and it becomes popular, then like the fun part of the process starts to diminish, and you expect it to continue maintaining this stuff because so many people, so many companies, they become completely dependent on these pieces, and nobody else is going to keep it running. So you're stuck between like supporting your baby or letting it die. And there's no incentives apart from your own personal sense of responsibility. And that it's amazing open source has got this far on top of that. But it's just interesting to imagine how much further it would be and how much further like humanity as a whole would be if people who needed that extra incentive did have that extra incentive. So yeah, be interesting to see how T protocol can like improve the entire space.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean because I had this issue also with Node emoji. I didn't have so much time for open source anymore. And I started looking for maintainers. So I put into the README, I put like, oh, I'm looking for maintainers. If you're interested, you can email me. And I did get a couple of requests, but the problem is they're always interested, but then it's like hard for them to get started on it because they probably also have jobs. Like I totally get it that you don't have time for open source because the least of us get paid for doing open source work. It's great if you can in your job get paid for doing open source work, but unfortunately that's rarely the case. So it's really hard to find someone to do the job, like you said, and pick up your project. So in the end, I'm always end up being the maintainer of Node emoji, and I always end up. I try to do at least the minimum amount to keep it running, to not let it die. But I hope that in the future, when I have more time for it, that I can put more work into also open source projects. It would be really nice because I enjoy doing it. It's just that the incentives are not there, and if it's like, rather should I spend time on doing something that I get paid for, or that is also very demanding. It's not like I also don't want to, like at work, I also don't want to leave my clients alone or tell them like I don't have time today, because it's really hard to like justify putting the time in, although it is really important for those projects as well. Like they use a lot of open source projects, so they would benefit from it, but a lot of companies don't understand. I totally get it.
Yeah, companies, they have their own. I always see corporate entities as being this kind of amoral engine. They morally know they should support open source, but they can't financially justify it because open source somehow does exist. Their donations may assist, or it is difficult to quantify it. So, yeah, we like what we're doing with T Protocol in the respect that we're changing like the nature of open source from being a charity to being some kind of value ecosystem where companies can see how they're actually getting value out of the token they're putting into the system, and so it's like a win-win scenario. Anyway, I'll try not to shill T Protocol every time we talk.
No, but I think it's an interesting project, definitely.
We think so, clearly, but we'll see how it goes later this year when we launch. Like, we have a lot of hopes and dreams for what we can do to this space and how we can assist it and how we're different to like previous attempts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
For sure. Yeah. Wishing for the best, of course. Super excited for what's to come. But yeah, on that note, definitely touched on a few points there. I know one of them being, the time difficulty as to the trade-off of, having a full-time paying job and having, open source and trying to maintain it the best you can with the time that you have outside of supporting yourself, within potentially a regular full-time job, let's say. But is there any ways that you've gotten funding for your project in the past that have been somewhat sustainable or helpful, that you've seen, and or any of those really a potential for you to make open source kind of your full-time gig, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I do get some support. Unfortunately, it's only, like Max said, it's like a couple of cups of coffee maybe. Because the problem with my open source project is that I'm registered on different platforms. One of them is TideLift, one is the ThankStaff and GitHub sponsors. So those like free bigger platforms for getting sponsorships on open source. And GitHub sponsors obviously is a simple one where you just directly donate to an organization or like a person or project and then the person. And then that's where I do get some donations. It's nice that people like find me there and then donate to me, and I also give them something in return. Like I write some their names into the README and thank them for it and so on. So I like that. But the problem is that for packages like mine is like usually a sub dependency of some project. So I'm like, for example, maybe there's a library, like let's say a React library that adds a text input field where you can autocomplete emoji. And then they probably use my library, or they maybe use my library. And but then I don't get the money for that from GitHub sponsors, because maybe someone is sponsoring that library and then they get all the money. And then if they are nice enough, maybe some distribute to their dependents if they're like an important dependency. but that's a manual step that you need to take as a maintainer. So it's often hard to even find out how to split it up upon your dependencies and so on. And I think Tidelift and FangStaff, they do it a little bit better already, where if you donate to some project, I think it automatically splits it up upon the dependents. But then again, I have the issue that I'm usually pretty deep down in the dependency tree, so I get like little bit amount, like in the like dollars amount or something per donation, which is not a lot. And I can understand you definitely want to support the projects that you use the most. That makes sense. But then there's a lot of projects that are probably like mine, probably even more important, like essential projects. Like I read about, I think, Corchias, or what it was, like some polyfills like that. They don't get, or I think it's one person, they don't get enough support for their project, although it's used by almost everyone in the JavaScript ecosystem. So I think that's really unfortunate that these tools do help because they split it up, but the ones that are very deep in the dependency tree, providing core functionality like polyfills and stuff like that, they don't benefit from that kind of system so much. They only get a little part of it, and that's not very unfortunate for those core technologies.
Yeah, thanks.dev does the splitting of donations to dependencies. I don't think Tidelift does. Well, I might be wrong. I have one project on Tidelift, and Tidelift, great project. Really appreciate them existing. They too were trying to change the narrative, so it's not just charity, encouraging enterprise to pay for the more dedicated support from open source maintainers. Not sure how well it's working. I hope it works. For me, there's tons of room in the space for many different ways to try and fix the problem here. But what you're talking about with these projects that are deep in the stack, we call it the Nebraska problem after the XKCD.
Yeah.
And we call those Nebraska projects. And right from the start with T-Protocol, we were trying to make sure that those projects were the ones that got suitable amounts of support. Because the truth is, the ones that get reasonable amounts of donations already are, the favorites at the top of the stack. It's like a beauty contest, effectively, where they're the ones that stand out and get all the attention. And so T-Rank was very deliberately designed to make sure that the flow of token through the system does hit the Nebraska projects. So you don't need to be someone who markets yourself in order to get support for your much needed contributions to the entire ecosystem. We've recently been talking with NTP, which is the Network Time Protocol, which basically, every clock connected to a computer uses NTP to keep itself interlinked. So sadly, my smart oven does not, thanks Samsung. But we've been talking to them because they've had some tragic event happen recently to them, which means that they're in dire straits. And there is no system that really allows them to get suitable support. But T-Protocol can work in that respect, both by getting token flow due to being a dependency of other important projects, but also via our staking mechanism, which is the other way that we're going to inject token towards these projects, which I hope companies, like Apple, NTP is used on every iPhone, right? They should definitely be giving support through to the NTP Foundation. But with our system, like both Apple and the project gain, it's a win-win. So yeah, we recognize that. It's a serious problem where you get buried in the stack. Open source is really this system where every year we invent new technologies and tools, right? And then next year everyone builds on top of them. And then after a few years, everyone's forgotten about the one that is a little, 3 or 4 layers deep, because it's just an essential part of what keeps the internet running. And yet the people who are maintaining it are struggling to do so. I have a bunch of projects that aren't really very maintained at the moment. One of which I'm getting some angry issues opened as we speak, because it's a library for iPhone, and Apple have changed everything like they do every year. And I can't. But I keep saying to people that if T-Protocol existed and it wasn't me who created it, then I would have be able to work on these projects full time. Like this library in particular was used by 100,000 apps on the iPhone App Store at one point, and its T rank would be great if we supported Cocoa Pods, which we do not yet. I put the pressure on, but we had to support a subset of the package managers out the gate.
That's nice. Yeah, I mean, hit on some really great points there. It's great to see projects that are obviously supporting in some way these different open source projects, and really excited to see how much T can support these developers in the near future. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing that feedback there. I guess the last really question I would love to ask you, Daniel, if my screen is still okay. My computer's kind of freaking out. Do I still look okay?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My screen
As
is like
handsome
totally.
as ever, Ashton.
Appreciate that. Well, yeah, essentially, would love to know kind of how you initially got interested in the testnet from T, Daniel, and what do you think currently of the app? If you have any feedback, and what you're kind of excited about with it, or what you think so far.
Yeah, so I got interested because like I said, I'm kind of this project that is deep in the dependency tree, and I know that I'm definitely not alone there. I know there's lots of projects that are way more important out there that have the same exact problem, and I think it's really interesting that this is the only project that I have found in the open source ecosystem that actually supports those kinds of projects. All the other ones, like I said, they do split them up in some way, but they only split up usually on dependence. So the deeper you are in the tree, which kind of is, the deeper you are in the tree in the open source world means that your project is more important. So if it's deeper in the tree, it's increasingly more important to the whole ecosystem. But most of those sponsorship platforms, they work the other way around. They give it to the, I don't want to say that they're the least important ones. Definitely not. There's definitely some important projects at the top as well. But I'm just saying that the deeper ones, they can be very important and very essential to the open source ecosystem, and they don't get the support otherwise. So I was really interested in that aspect. That was one of the aspects that interested me in T protocol. And the other aspect is that often you have the problem now, you have to get like companies on board to invest into it. And I think the interesting part of T is that you can invest basically in the whole open source ecosystem, and then it gets distributed according to the rank, like how important it is in the ecosystem. I think that's an interesting concept, because sometimes you might, like you said, it's like a beauty contest, or like there's some like favorite libraries that people have that they use a lot, and they are definitely important. But there's also other libraries that are essential, but they are maybe not as like fancy or nice. They're like doing little things like polyfills, which are super important, but not like very not like a thing that you directly use all the time. So you don't really pay attention to it. It's just there for you all the time, but you don't pay attention to it, so you don't think about sponsoring it. And I think it's great that T protocol works on that problem and attempts to solve it, and hopefully it will would be great.
Yeah, we're certainly hopeful with how we've designed it. Like, we spent the vast majority of the 2.5 years we've existed just designing this protocol, thinking through all the permutations. But one of the things I like about what we're doing is that it's the protocol itself is being launched by a non-profit for a start. Not my company, the dev shop that's building it, but a non-profit. And this was important because we don't want profit incentives to interfere with how the protocol is going to work. And that non-profit is governed by people who understand open source, and eventually by key open source maintainers in the space. And then the governance of that protocol is handled by votes on chain by verified open source maintainers. So it's an open source protocol for open source and run by the open source community. And that means that if we haven't got the way we're distributing rewards correct, the open source community will be able to direct it correctly towards that. One question I got this morning was about whether or not we're unfairly compensating projects that are kind of, small ones that aren't that important. Like the Node ecosystem is vast, and there's some packages which are like 3 lines of code, right? LeftPad is a great example, right? Now, we feel that the T rank of things like LeftPad is actually correct. Like it's not very big. So it's a little bit. So the amount we're giving that package is proportionate to like its impact, which is always what we were going for. But let's say it isn't correct. The open source community will be able to propose solutions to that, which then get voted on, which are then enacted by that nonprofit entity that's only existence is to ensure the protocol succeeds in delivering to its users, the open source community.
Yeah, absolutely. For Daniel, are there any other open source packages that you're maybe trying to maintain right now? Maybe some that are like really deep in the dependency tree, like React Redux or some other package that maybe our community doesn't know about?
Well, like I said, the only one that I think is deep in the dependency tree is Node emoji. The other ones that I have are more like top level, I would say. So they like I said, for Redux, I did Redux undo and so on. And I would like to create more open source projects as well. I'm not sure if maybe some of them will become some of the deeper projects as well. We will see. One thing that I'm currently trying to work on is, so like I said, I work like as a technical advisor and developer for enterprises and the public sector, and most of them are like for example, in the enterprise sector, I have a lot of insurances, and in the public sector, obviously the government. I'm currently doing it for the Austrian government and making like citizen services, and most of these projects are actually forms, like just putting in data and getting something out of it. And I realized that there's not that much support for really complex forms. Like, for example, insurances, they have forms with tons of dependencies where when you enter something in this field, another field appears, and then you have to enter that field to get another field. They have like lots of cross dependencies and stuff like that. And the same for the government as well. They also have more complex forms. And I realized that there's not that many libraries that do this well. Like there's lots of libraries for building forms, but they are usually very simple forms, and the advanced part usually gets really hard and boilerplate heavy in these. And I would like to build a library out of my experience in these fields to support this like niche use case of having these more complex forms where you're where they're more focused on that and not so much on having a simple login form or something like that. So that I think that would be really interesting, and a lot of companies would benefit from it. It could get used also in other libraries again, and yeah, I think it would be it could be an interesting project. So that's something I'm trying to work on recently, when I find the time.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a very typical open source Genesis story. So I wish you all the luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Alrighty. So I guess we can move on to the questions that you have for Max.
Sure.
Daniel, I guess you can go ahead and ask away.
Yeah. So I really like the idea of having a decentralized system for distributing these rewards. But as all of us know, when money gets involved, there's people are going to get greedy and trying to also abuse the system. That's a really unfortunate part that all projects have to deal with when it's about money. And I even see this in Hacktoberfest, for example. A lot of maintainers during Hacktoberfest get spammed with PRs that just do a little typo fix, which is it's good to have contributions. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes they do it just to get like the T-shirt or the rewards that you get, and that can spam maintainers as well, and that's a big problem. in the open source ecosystem. And here it's just talking about the t-shirt, but now you're distributing rewards. So I was wondering, what are you doing to prevent kind of the bad actors that are trying to, like, for example, they could just clutter the registry with dependency trees to increase their T rank artificially, or mass submit bug reports to like annoy a maintainer that they don't like, or something like that. What are you doing to prevent that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And, we knew from the start that what we were doing would attract people trying to exploit it. As you say, when there's actual value attached, like if people are doing such things just for a t-shirt, then they're obviously going to do it for a token. Starting with the vulnerability reports require you to stake a bunch of T token in order to submit them. So I don't think there's going to be much, if any, spam type reports for the vulnerabilities. Now, when you're talking about these kinds of things, there's always going to be some spam. Like, you can't get rid of it all, but it's just the nature of things, right? We've spent 25, 30 years trying to fix spam with email, and we're pretty successful nowadays, but it still exists. It's still there. And the reason for that is email's free, right? So vulnerability reports require you to stake a bunch of T token in order to do that. So there's an expense attached to it. You have to pay. And if your vulnerability report isn't valid, then you lose that token. We slash it, so we take it away from you. So it has to be valid. I don't see much spam happening there, but we'll see. We haven't actually tested that portion yet. That's coming later in the testnet. Regarding creating projects, so we very carefully designed T-Rank so that it would, as much as possible, prevent people from creating fake packages in order to accumulate T-Rank rewards. So the ranking mechanism itself is designed to prevent that as much as possible. Now, during the testnet, we've seen people get around that. So we've learned from it. And that was the point of the testnet, right? We want to go live with mainnet where, as much as possible, there's no incentive to creating fake open source packages, spamming the registries, and far more importantly, causing hassle to open source maintainers themselves. Now, earlier in our testnet, we discovered that we'd incentivize people to create t.yaml files on projects they didn't own. And we very quickly moved to make that something that wasn't incentivized. So it stopped. And we're still very sorry about that. We should have seen it coming. But, you can never predict everything. And we're very active to work against it. T-Rank by itself is pretty spam resistant because your ranking is affected by the ranks of everyone else around you, effectively saying that your rank is not going to be great until someone else with a high rank is depending on you or dependent on you. And we will probably continue to build out that concept even more so that building out spam packages just isn't fruitful at all. And we're determined to make sure that when mainnet happens, it would take genius ideas we haven't even thought of to create rewards from fake open source packages. But as I say, this is a protocol run by the community. So if it happens, we're going to invite the community to help us to figure out the solutions for everybody's benefit. But yeah, great question.
Thank you. That sounds really great. And I hope you're able to achieve that, because it would be a big issue, but I think you're on the right way there. And as you said, if there's any suggestions, then people can create proposals as well. So yeah. Another thing that I was a bit worried about is that I'm totally clear on the benefits for open source maintainers. Like, they can register the projects and get a share of T tokens to support their maintenance of projects. But how you're actually incentivizing people to invest in the T protocol, like in the T ecosystem, and especially companies, like you said, it would be great if Apple, for example, invested in NTP, but they don't. So what are you doing there to get them interested in investing there?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it's key to what we're building, right? When I initially came up with the idea, I didn't understand how cryptocurrencies and tokenomics works that well. But I talked to people and they were like, oh yeah, we can figure out a tokenomics system which supports this, because you can't just give away token. If you do that, the token price trends towards zero. And then what we're trying to achieve here fails. So you need to create a system which injects that token back in. So as you're saying, like, what gives people the idea that the token has value? Well, firstly, we spent the last 2.5 years talking about how T protocol is fundamentally changing that narrative on open source. It's not a charity. Open source is fundamental infrastructure that keeps all software and the internet running. And we have 1.2 million people signed up who believe in that messaging. Like 1.2 million people. I don't think any of the other sponsorship platforms can boast those kinds of numbers of interest after just 80 days of being live on testnet. They believe that open source fundamentally has value, and they want to participate in the tokenomic systems that we built and enjoy the benefits of that value themselves as well. So like a big part of what we're doing here is changing that narrative and selling that story. And it's easy because open source already has proved its value over the last 25, 30 years, like in spades. The only thing that was different is nobody figured out how to represent that value. But also, you have to build out a bunch of utility systems on top. So this year, as part of our phase 1 rollout, we have the token rewards to open source developers, but we also have staking against projects. And this is where you can say, okay, I believe in this project and I want to put my token down and lock it up so that I can't take it away, and then earn a yield on top of that. So people can put token into the system and then earn rewards. And you also, as an open source maintainer, are earning some of those rewards as well. So it's a win-win. You're saying, okay, like we're supporting the value of the open source ecosystem. And I'm hoping companies are going to be like incentivized to adopt that. Like companies with available capital, you know, they buy US treasuries or they put it into other like savings type systems. This is a one where they can earn a yield, but also they can support the open source ecosystem. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. There's going to be legal issues for them to work through, so I don't exactly expect that to happen immediately. But I also expect the community to put pressure on these companies to do that, because now it's not a donation. Now it's something where they can get value too. And also, it's a system where we've really made it like as easy as possible for them to contribute to the entire open source ecosystem. And things like thanks.dev, maybe they have trickle-down effects to the JavaScript ecosystem, but it doesn't go any further. We go all the way down to glibc, and eventually I hope we will be able to get down to the kernel and things like that as well, although it's a little trickier, right? We're going to need a few open source proposals on T protocol in order to figure out how to support that kind of software, which doesn't have a package manager attached for a start. But it's also the same kind of problem as like, where do we send token that goes through the node ecosystem when it gets to the bottom, right? Core.js, and then what? Like Core.js is a great example. It's like 9 billion downloads a year. 80% of the top 100 websites in the world use it. And yeah, the guy is barely able to afford to work on it. I really hope that we can get him to sign up. But do we then distribute from Core.js to Node? But how about Dino and Bun? You know, the other runtime. Like, how should we be splitting that reward at that point off? So we're going to need the open source community to help us make those decisions. We have a few ideas. So we've convinced all these people that there's value there. And also we have the vulnerability reporting system this year as well, where there is token locked up, and it can lead to slashing reward penalties against people who have staked against those projects. It's very important that staking against projects has risk associated with it. That's necessary to create utility that then makes the tokenomics model that's functional. It's a very interesting journey understanding how economics in a microeconomic sector where you control it works, I've discovered. And you have to introduce all these utility functions in order to make the token flow in circles so it continues to top itself up, and then that maintains like a value that everyone can understand and use and utilize. So the vulnerability reports, yeah, they can lead to losing stake for people who stake, but not the maintainers themselves. You know, we don't want you to be punished. We just want you to fix vulnerabilities that are found. But then we have what we're calling phase 2 and 3 coming over the next few years. I'm not at liberty to talk about how they work exactly yet, but essentially the idea is to create ever more reasons for the token value to be propped up.
That's definitely an interesting concept. I'm also not so familiar with with these kind of things, but it sounds like a good system where people can like put in money and they also get a reward, but then there's also risk associated to it, and that risk actually incentivizes maintainers also to or like incentivizes people to maybe fix the vulnerability, or like if they maybe have a stake in that project, maybe they will be the ones to create a pull request to fix it, so they don't avoid losing their tokens. So it sounds like an interesting concept. Will definitely be interesting to see how it plays out, but I think it could help a lot there, because if people don't, if it's only the maintainers that have a stake in the project, which is the default of open source, I mean, others use it, but they kind of expect it to be like a product that you need to fix this now, and you don't get anything in return. And that's really unfortunate. So maybe that incentivizes this whole ecosystem to be more like more collaborative, where people, if there's an issue, that was the core idea of open source. If there's an issue and you need it fixed, you can make a pull request and fix it yourself, and then the maintainer will just check it, and if it works, then they merge it and you contributed to it. But unfortunately, that's not happening enough in open source. So I hope that such kind of system can further incentivize contributing to open source as well. That would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we feel it can. You know, it's about how the token in the treasury for the projects is like distributed after that point, right? And we feel that it not only can be used to help with the maintenance, but you could set up a smart contract that automatically distributes it to people who open pull requests, provided they're merged, and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. I really look forward to exploring it with the community.
Yeah, that was actually another question I wanted to ask, is you just answered it a bit, at least, that it would be cool to have some more like functionalities for maintainers, like, for example, automatically splitting up tokens for all the maintainers, or maybe even depending on the pull requests that were made, so everyone who contributed gets a share, because that could further incentivize people to actually go ahead and make a pull request because they get something out of it. And
yeah.
I think that would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's one of the reasons we designed the way the token is distributed to be to the project. So you, as a maintainer of the project, become a person on the multi-sig for the project's treasury, but it's not your token. Every open source project's different in how they're governed, how they're maintained, how many people work on it. Like, we had one project join that wanted 400 people on the multi-sig for the project, and we're like, well, it's your choice. If that's what you want, that's how it should be, right? But yeah, we deliberately have not yet designed mechanisms for automating how that token would then be distributed to the maintainers or other people. Partly because we want to field the community and see what are the most common examples of how they want that to work. And partly because I believe in building like what is necessary first. And then when you have a greater understanding about what you've built, like a lot of people who found startups pretend that they had the vision for what it is they were trying to build all along, you know, just like came into my mind one evening and I knew exactly what I was going to build. But the truth is you're building like incrementally based on your understanding of what it is you're trying to make. And it's not until mainnet launches that we're going to really truly understand like what we need to do as next steps. So yeah, it's manual now, but like rest assured, we don't want it to be tedious. So automated distribution of rewards to maintainers in some form will be coming. And then after that, like, you know, I'm looking forward to the open source community building smart contracts on top of what we built and distributing those so that you can, the community itself will invent the ways that the token is distributed. And I'm sure one of those will indeed be distributing to merged pull requests. So you probably sign the pull request, or all the commits need to be GPG signed or something like that. And then you can spin up a smart contract that then can translate that GPG signature to a T protocol address or something like that. And then it could be automated. You could contribute to any project that's on T protocol and then be automatically receiving like parts of that project's reward schedule for doing that. Like that, it's very interesting and exciting to think what could be done.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm a big fan of in all the projects that I do. I'm a big fan of basically splitting up the earnings evenly. So if someone contributed a lot more to, for example, if someone takes over the maintenance of Node Emoji and they do a lot of refactoring and a lot of work, I also want them to benefit more from that, because they did the work. So I think they deserve it. And like I said, that also benefits the whole open source ecosystem, because then once you have an incentive to contribute, then there will be more contributions, hopefully. So I think that's a great idea. So I hope that I understand that they're not coming right away in the first version. That makes sense. But I do hope that they're coming in like a future iteration. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We will not be sitting on our palms when we go live.
I think it's going to be exciting to see what people build on top of it, for sure. And I know that obviously we can't build everything ourselves. That's the beauty of open source, is we can't wait to, give everyone the creativity to build on top of it and create their ideal, viewpoints or visions of how they might see it going. So yeah, super excited to explore that in the future. Yeah, I don't know if Daniel, you had one last question, or if you're ready to wrap it up. But I know it's already been a great and a pretty long session so far. But
yeah, I think that's all from my side, from the questions I have right now. I mean, maybe in the future I can write to you and ask more, but for now, that's it.
For sure. Great. Yeah, thanks so much. I don't know if anyone had any closing thoughts, but from my side, it's been a really great session. Really appreciate your time here. I think we really highlighted some really key points as to why T protocol exists, why we're creating it, of course, and what else is out there and how we're hopefully going to be beating the competition in a sustainable way. But I know that obviously we need lots of creativity, lots of support from maintainers like yourself, and we really appreciate you signing up and be a part of it, and being part of this early journey, as we're intending to be around for hopefully quite a while. So yeah, with that, really thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Words or anything to add?
No, I really appreciate you coming on, Daniel, and it's great to hear your story and how open source has become part of your life. And I look forward to speaking more once we go live with T protocol.
Sure. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Awesome. Make sure you go to t.xyz to learn more, sign up, register your project, and hopefully we'll see you on the next recording.